The air in the private dining salon of L'Étoile Filante, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, was less an atmosphere and more a currency. It was thick with the metallic tang of ambition, the buttery scent of old money, and the sharp, sterile aroma of a deal hovering on the verge of existence. From her corner of the room, Clara Evans knew the smell well. For 2 years, it had been the perfume of her invisibility, a constant, cloying reminder of the chasm between the world she served and the one she dreamed of. Tonight, the air crackled with a particular intensity. The man holding court was Julian Croft, the celebrated CEO of Ethelred Corporation. His face, a handsome constellation of confidence and charisma, was a fixture on the covers of business magazines. He was hailed as a modern messiah, a visionary whose new diagnostic technology, the Oracle, promised to detect diseases years before they manifested. His smile was a financial instrument, his handshake a binding resolution. He was deploying both tonight on his guests, a delegation from the formidable Tatsu Dynamics of Tokyo. Leading them was Mr. Kenji Ishikawa, a man in his late 70s, whose quiet demeanor concealed a mind as sharp and intricate as a samurai's blade. His face was a roadmap of thoughtful consideration, his eyes missing nothing. He and his 2 younger lieutenants, Mr. Endo and Mr. Saito, listened with profound stillness as Croft, aided by a polished interpreter, wove a tapestry of a utopian future. "The Oracle isn't just a machine, gentlemen," Croft declared, his voice a resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very crystal of the water goblets. "It's a promise of longevity, of security. Your investment of $500 million isn't merely the acquisition of a stake in Ethelred. It is the key that will unlock a new era for humanity." Clara moved with the practiced stealth of a ghost, refilling water glasses, her movements economical and silent. Her uniform, a simple, severe black dress with a crisp white apron, was a shroud of anonymity. To these titans of industry, she was a function of the room, no more sentient than the damask wallpaper. They couldn't know that she had spent her childhood at the knee of her grandfather, a World War II veteran who had served in the Pacific and fallen in love with the Japanese language and its people. He had taught her not just the words, but the soul behind them, the intricate dance of honor and obligation encoded in every syllable. He had taught her kigo, the formal, honorific speech used in business, and the folklore behind the kanji. She had once hoped to use that gift, perhaps in diplomacy, before her grandfather's own small business was destroyed by a silver-tongued con-man, and the subsequent medical bills had chained her to this life of quiet servitude. She listened as she worked, her mind a dual processor. The interpreter, a man whose suit was as slick as his smile, rendered Croft's sermon in precise, formal Japanese. Mr. Ishikawa would nod. His questions, when they came, were like surgical strikes, inquiring about data validation protocols and regulatory approval timelines. The main courses, a symphony of seared foie gras and truffle-dusted risotto that cost more than Clara's monthly rent, were cleared. Finally, as the dessert plates were being discreetly removed, Croft's personal aide, a perpetually anxious young man named Liam, entered and placed a single, magnificent leather-bound portfolio before his boss, the grand finale. "Gentlemen," Croft announced, his smile reaching its zenith, "the final agreement, every projection, every safeguard we have discussed, codified." He opened the portfolio and slid it across the vast expanse of polished rosewood toward Mr. Ishikawa. In both English and Japanese, of course. Our legal teams have been in lockstep for weeks. Mr. Ishikawa and his colleagues leaned in, their expressions shifting from contemplative to forensic. They began to scrutinize the Japanese text on the right-hand side of the document. Clara was clearing the last of the dessert plates near Mr. Saito when her gaze drifted down to the open page. It was a dense forest of legal kanji, characters she knew intimately. One particular clause in the final addendum, Section D, Paragraph 7, snagged her attention. Croft, ever the conductor of his own orchestra, began to narrate the crescendo. Now, the final clause there, Section D, is simply a standard intellectual property covenant. It states that upon closing, Ethelred grants Tatsu Dynamics exclusive licensing rights in the Asian market, and in return, Tatsu Dynamics waives the right to independent third-party verification of the Oracle's diagnostic algorithms for a period of 5 years, a gesture of mutual trust, really, to protect our proprietary technology. The interpreter dutifully translated this into Japanese. The final clause, Section D, is a standard intellectual property covenant. It waives the right to independent verification for 5 years as a gesture of mutual trust. But Clara had just read the clause. Her heart, which had been beating in a steady, unobtrusive rhythm, suddenly began to hammer against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her mind reread the complex characters, a frantic scramble to confirm what she'd seen, certain she had to be mistaken. She wasn't. The characters were precise, their meaning chillingly clear. Mr. Ishikawa nodded slowly, a deep, resonant sound of satisfaction. His hand reached for the elegant Mont Blanc fountain pen that lay beside the portfolio. This was it. The moment a $500 million deal would be sealed on the foundation of a catastrophic lie. A cold wave of nausea washed over Clara. This was not her fight. Her purpose was to be invisible, to anticipate the need for more water, to vanish when she wasn't needed. Intervening would be professional immolation. She would be fired, blacklisted, cast out from the only world that could pay her bills. She would lose everything, which, she thought with a pang of bitter irony, wasn't much. But then, an image flooded her mind. Her grandfather, a proud man reduced to a husk of his former self, sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a contract filled with labyrinthine clauses that had stolen his life's work. The memory was a burning ember in her stomach. He had been swindled by a man just like Julian Croft, a man whose smile was a mask and whose promises were traps. Mr. Ishikawa uncapped the pen. The soft click was like a gunshot in the silent room. Clara's training, her fear, her instinct for self-preservation, all of it screamed at her to remain a ghost. But the words were already there, coiled on her tongue, forged in the fire of her grandfather's memory. She took a single, almost imperceptible step forward, her knuckles white where she gripped the silver water pitcher. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it cut through the charged atmosphere like a shard of glass. She spoke in perfect formal Japanese, addressing the elderly gentleman directly. Ishikawa-sama, moshiwake gozaimasen. Mr. Ishikawa, my deepest apologies. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The 3 Japanese men froze as if she had flipped a switch. Mr. Ishikawa's hand, holding the pen, hovered a centimeter above the signature line. Croft and his interpreter swiveled their heads, their faces a canvas of confusion and irritation. Croft's smile didn't just falter. It evaporated, replaced by a flash of cold fury. Who was this servant to speak? Mr. Endo turned to her, his eyes wide with astonishment. He asked in Japanese, "What did you say?" The blood was roaring in Clara's ears, but her voice, when she spoke again, was as steady as a surgeon's hand, infused with a certainty that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. She looked directly at Mr. Ishikawa, ignoring the brewing tempest on Julian Croft's face. "I said," she repeated, her Japanese flawless and respectful. "My deepest apologies for this unforgivable interruption, Mr. Ishikawa." But that's not what it says. The silence that descended upon the room was not empty. It was a dense, heavy vacuum, pulling all the air and sound into a singularity of disbelief. 6 pairs of eyes were locked on Clara. Crofts were rapidly transitioning from confusion to a glacial, murderous rage. Mr. Ishikawa's had narrowed, not with anger, but with an intense, penetrating curiosity that was far more unnerving. It was Julian Croft who shattered the spell. "What the hell is this?" he snarled, his gaze snapping to his interpreter. "What did she say to them?" The interpreter, his face slick with a sudden sweat, stammered, She spoke to them in Japanese, sir. She apologized, and then, I don't—" Mr. Ishikawa paid them no mind. His focus was entirely on Clara. In a calm, measured tone that belied the tension in the room, he asked her a question in his native tongue. "Anata wa nani o yomimashita ka?" "What did you read?" Before Clara could answer, Croft slammed his open palm on the table. The sharp, violent crack made everyone flinch. "Liam, get her out of here, now! Gentlemen, I am profoundly sorry. A disgruntled employee. We have security for this sort of thing." Liam, the aide, scurried forward, his face a mask of pure panic. "Miss, you need to come with me. Please, right now." But Clara held her ground. The fear that had been a churning sea in her stomach had now crystallized into a diamond-hard resolve. She had already walked off the cliff. She might as well learn how to fly on the way down. "It says," Clara said, her voice ringing with clarity, still speaking Japanese and pointing a trembling finger at the document, that Tatsu Dynamics does not waive the right to verification. It says that Tatsu Dynamics assumes all legal and financial liability for any pre-existing inaccuracies, flaws, or fraudulent data related to the Oracle's core technology, retroactive to the project's inception. She paused, took a breath, and delivered the killing blow. And it indemnifies Ethelred Corporation against any and all future claims of malfunction or harm caused by these pre-existing flaws. It names a holding company, Okuri Inu LLC, as the current vessel for this liability, which you will be acquiring. A collective, sharp hiss of indrawn breath came from the Japanese delegation. Mr. Saito snatched the document, his hands shaking with fury as he read the clause aloud. It was precisely as Clara had described. The language was dense, a thicket of legal jargon designed to obscure, but the meaning was unmistakable. It wasn't a covenant of trust. It was a masterfully crafted time bomb, and Tatsu Dynamics was being handed the detonator. Croft's face had become a ghastly, bloodless canvas. He didn't need to understand Japanese to read the dawning horror and cold fury on the faces of his would-be partners. He stared at Clara, his eyes promising a slow and painful annihilation. "You're fired," he hissed in English, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "You have no conception of the mistake you've just made." Mr. Ishikawa rose slowly from his chair. His serene calm had been replaced by an arctic contempt. He folded his hands behind his back and bestowed upon Julian Croft a look that could have frozen magma. "Croft-san," he said, his voice dangerously soft. The interpreter, now trembling, rushed to translate. "It would seem our definition of mutual trust is fundamentally different. We are withdrawing our offer, effective immediately. This meeting is concluded." Without another glance at Croft, he and his colleagues turned toward the door. As they passed Clara, each of the 3 men, including the venerable Mr. Ishikawa, paused and gave her a slight, formal bow. It was a gesture of profound respect, a silent acknowledgement that sealed Julian Croft's fate in that room more surely than any signed contract. The moment the door clicked shut, Croft's meticulously constructed facade disintegrated. With a roar of pure, unrestrained rage, he swept his arm across the table, sending crystal, silver, and the $500 million lie crashing to the floor in a cacophony of destruction. "Liam!" he bellowed, his face a mottled purple. "Get security, get her out of my sight, and get Marcus Thorne on the phone, now!" Two large men in dark suits materialized from the hallway and seized Clara by the arms. Their grips were brutal, bruising. As they manhandled her from the salon, her eyes met Croft's one last time. The look he gave her was not just anger. It was a vow that this was not the end, but the beginning of her ruin. She was frog-marched through the chaotic heat of the kitchen, past the stunned, gaping faces of her co-workers, and shoved unceremoniously through a rear service door into the cold, grimy New York night. The heavy steel door slammed shut, the click of the lock echoing with a dreadful finality. She stood there for a moment, her thin uniform useless against the biting wind, the stench of wet garbage filling her lungs. Her purse, her phone, her keys, all were still inside. She had just saved a company from a $500 million fraud, and her reward was the looming shadow of a ruined billionaire's vengeance, and the chilling certainty that she had just detonated her own life. Alone in the alley, the adrenaline began to recede, replaced by a deep, visceral fear. What had she done? The answer lay 30 years in the past, in a cluttered workshop behind a modest suburban house. Her grandfather, Frank Evans, was a master carpenter, a man who believed in straight lines, true measurements, and the integrity of a handshake. He had learned Japanese not in a classroom, but in the ruins of post-war Japan, finding a shared humanity with the people he was meant to occupy. He taught Clara that language was a bridge, that every kanji character was a story. "A single stroke, Clara-chan," he would say, his calloused finger tracing a character in a book of folklore, "can change the meaning of everything. It can turn a protector into a demon." He'd told her stories of the yokai, the spirits and monsters of Japan. One had always stuck with her, the okuri inu, the sending-off dog, a spectral hound that follows travelers at night. If you stumble, it will devour you. A perfect metaphor for a hidden liability. Years later, a polished developer had come to Frank with a grand project, waving contracts that promised a secure retirement. The man's smile was as bright as Julian Croft's. The fine print, however, was a nest of vipers. Frank lost everything. The stress shattered his health, and the man who had survived a war was defeated by a few paragraphs of legalese. Clara had watched the light go out of his eyes. Standing in that alley, shivering, Clara finally understood her grandfather's lesson. A few strokes of a pen, a promise turned into a lie. Tonight, the ghost of her grandfather's ruin had given her the courage to speak. The ghost of his lessons had given her the words. She had no idea what Julian Croft was capable of, but as she hugged her thin arms to her chest, a small, defiant ember of anger began to glow in the pit of her stomach. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was Frank Evans's granddaughter, and the fight had just begun. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in fear and isolation. After a humiliating trek to a 24-hour diner to borrow a phone, Clara finally reached her roommate and got back to their cramped Queens apartment. Sleep was a foreign country. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren was the sound of Croft's retribution arriving. His face, twisted in that final moment of fury, was seared onto the inside of her eyelids. The following afternoon, a text from her former manager at L'Étoile Filante arrived. "Your personal items are in a box with the doorman. Do not enter the building. Do not contact any staff. You are terminated for cause. A second message, a news alert, vibrated seconds later. Ethelred Tatsu Dynamics, 500 metals deal stalls. Sources cite complex negotiations. Complex negotiations. The euphemism was so bland it was insulting. They were trying to smother the fire, to manage the story. But the deal wasn't dead, merely wounded. Croft was still fighting, which meant his first order of business would be to neutralize the threat. To neutralize her. 2 days later, the knock came. It wasn't a gentle rap. It was a firm, authoritative sound that vibrated through the cheap apartment door. Peeking through the peephole, Clara saw a man who seemed to have been carved from ice and tailored by a mortician. He was in his 50s, with a mane of silver hair, an impeccably cut suit, and a smile that didn't reach his cold, reptilian eyes. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice a smooth, chilling baritone. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am chief counsel for Mr. Croft." Clara's blood ran cold. This was the man Croft had called for, the fixer. "I have nothing to say to you," she said, her voice trembling as she tried to push the door closed. A polished Italian loafer inserted itself into the gap, stopping the door with immovable force. "I believe you do," Thorne said, his smile unwavering. The quiet pressure of his foot was more menacing than a kick. "May I come in? It would be a disservice to your future to discuss it in a public hallway." Defeated, she let him in. He swept his gaze over her small, tidy apartment with an air of profound disdain, finally settling on the edge of her worn armchair as if afraid of contamination. "Let us be direct, Miss Evans. You have caused a significant disruption for my client, a very costly disruption." "Your client is a fraud," Clara shot back, her fear stoking her anger. Thorne chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "An interesting perspective. In our world, it's called savvy business. You, on the other hand, have committed tortious interference with a contract, not to mention violating a dozen clauses in your employment agreement regarding confidentiality." "My agreement didn't say I had to be an accessory to a crime." "That's the crux of it, isn't it?" Thorne said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You have no standing, no credibility. You are a waitress. He is Julian Croft. In the court of public opinion, and more importantly, in a court of law, whose story do you think prevails? He will bury you in litigation. Your family will be bankrupted by legal fees before you even see a courtroom. Your name will be synonymous with unstable, unreliable, litigious. You will be a pariah." He let the words hang in the air, each one a poisoned dart. The threat was not just credible, it was a certainty. "Or," Thorne continued, his tone softening into something even more sinister, "we can make this entire unfortunate incident disappear." He placed a thick, elegant envelope on her coffee table. Inside is a severance agreement and a cashier's check for $500,000. Clara stared at the envelope. $500,000. It was a fantastical sum. It could pay off the last of her grandfather's medical debts. It could buy her parents a new home. It was a ticket out of this life, a return to the future that had been stolen from her. All she had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement, a sworn affidavit stating that she had misread and misinterpreted the contract due to a superficial understanding of legal Japanese. A promise to vanish. "You sign the affidavit," Thorne explained calmly. "You accept the generous severance. You begin a new life, anywhere you wish, a clean slate." She looked from the envelope, a paper key to a golden cage, to Marcus Thorne's cold, expectant eyes. She thought of her grandfather's face, etched with the shame of being duped. She thought of Mr. Ishikawa's bow, a silent testament to the honor she had upheld. Taking that money would be a desecration of both memories. It would mean Croft and Thorne were right, that everything and everyone had a price. It would mean her integrity, the only inheritance her grandfather had truly left her, was just another commodity to be sold. Slowly, with a deliberate, steady hand, she pushed the envelope back across the table. No. Thorne's smile finally vanished. The mask of civility fell away, revealing the predator beneath. You are making a catastrophic error, Miss Evans. The $500,000 was the carrot. I assure you, you have no desire to experience the stick. Get out of my apartment. He stood, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. As you wish. We have nothing more to discuss. He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. A piece of advice. Your parents live in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. It would be a shame if their peace were disturbed. Accidents, audits, unfortunate misunderstandings. They happen. The door closed, leaving Clara alone in a silence that was now thick with menace. This was no longer about her job or her reputation. This was about her family. The fear returned, colder and sharper than before, but it was now alloyed with a furious, righteous anger. She had to fight. But Thorne was right. She was a waitress against a billionaire's machine. She needed an ally. Someone who wasn't afraid of men like Julian Croft. Someone who hunted them for a living. Her mind flashed back to an article she'd read a year ago. It was a scathing, deeply researched piece in the New York Chronicle that questioned the initial clinical trial data for Ethelred's Oracle technology. It was a lone voice of skepticism in a global chorus of adulation. The byline was a name she had mentally filed away, impressed by the journalist's courage. Ben Carter. It was a desperate long shot. He was probably swamped with tips from conspiracy theorists every day. Why would her story be any different? But it was the only shot she had. With hands that trembled with a mixture of fear and resolve, she opened her laptop. She had to find him. She had to make him believe her. Her family's safety might depend on it. Finding Ben Carter's email address on the New York Chronicle website was the easy part. The challenge was composing a message that sounded like a credible tip, and not the paranoid ramblings of a fired waitress. She spent an hour crafting a few spare, potent sentences. Subject: urgent, corroboration for your Ethelred investigation. Mr. Carter. My name is Clara Evans. I am the reason the Ethelred Tatsu Dynamics deal collapsed. I have direct, first-hand knowledge of fraudulent clauses in the contract designed to conceal fatal flaws in the Oracle technology. Julian Croft's legal counsel has already tried to buy my silence and threatened my family. I read your article from last year. You are the only one who has ever questioned the official story. Please help me. Clara Evans. She pressed send, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She expected to wait days if she heard back at all. The reply came in 22 minutes. From ben.carteranychronicle.com. Subject: urgent. Where and when? They met the next morning in a gritty, no-name diner in the East Village, the kind of place that ran on black coffee and secrets. Ben Carter was not what she'd pictured. He looked less like a crusading journalist and more like a rumpled, perpetually exhausted history professor. He was in his late 40s, with a weary intelligence in his eyes, a tweed jacket that had seen better decades, and a cynical slump to his shoulders. He nursed a mug of coffee as if it were the only thing tethering him to the world. Miss Evans, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Your email contained some very heavy accusations. Start from the beginning, and don't leave out a single detail. His tone was flat, skeptical, Clara knew he was expecting her story to unravel under the slightest scrutiny. She took a deep breath and began. She painted the scene at L'Étoile Filante, describing the oppressive atmosphere, Croft's messianic pitch, the exact wording of the Japanese clause she'd read. She detailed the shocked reaction of the Tatsu delegation, Croft's volcanic rage, and the final respectful bow from Mr. Ishikawa. Then she told him about Marcus Thorne, the visit, the $500,000 offer, the thinly veiled threat against her parents. Throughout her account, Ben listened with an unnerving stillness, his expression unreadable. He didn't take a single note. When she finished, he took a long, slow sip of his coffee. "Okay," he said, setting the mug down. "So, let me see if I have this right. You, a waitress, just happen to be fluent in high-level legal Japanese because your grandfather taught you. You just happen to be in the room during a $500,000,000 negotiation. You just happen to spot a poison pill clause that an entire team of Japanese lawyers somehow missed." "Yes," Clara said, her voice unwavering. "That is what happened." And then Julian Croft's chief counsel, Marcus Thorne, a man who is practically a ghost, personally visits your apartment to offer you $500,000 in hush money, which you, a person who likely clears less than $50,000 a year, turned down purely out of principle. "I did it because it was the right thing to do," Clara retorted, a spark of anger cutting through her anxiety. "My grandfather was destroyed by a man just like Croft." Ben leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. "It's a beautiful story. It's a screenplay. But it's just a story. You have no recording of Thorne's offer. You don't have a copy of the contract. It is your word, the word of a recently terminated waitress with a grudge, against a beloved tech billionaire and his legion of lawyers. I can't print that. I'd be laughed out of the business, and Croft would own this paper by Tuesday." Desperation, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. "But it's the truth." "Truth isn't the story," Ben said, his voice laced with the weariness of a man who had chased too many ghosts. "Proof is the story. You need hard evidence, a document, a source, something tangible. Without it, you're just another tip." He began to gather his things, preparing to leave. He was dismissing her. After everything, he was just going to walk away. Panic surged through her. "Wait!" she called out, her voice sharp. "The holding company. I remember the name." Ben paused, his hand halfway into his jacket pocket. He looked at her, a flicker of genuine interest finally breaking through the wall of cynicism. "What about it?" "The clause," she said, closing her eyes, forcing herself back into that silent, gilded room. "The one that indemnified Ethelred. It transferred the liability from a specific LLC." I remember thinking the name was strange. It was a word my grandfather taught me from his folklore books. She scribbled the kanji characters on a napkin. "Okuri Inu." It means the sending off dog. A demon that stalks travelers and devours them if they fall. Ben stared at the napkin. He pulled out his phone and slowly typed the romanized name into a search engine. As he scrolled, his cynical demeanor began to visibly erode, replaced by the focused intensity of a hunter catching a scent. "Okuri Inu LLC," he muttered, reading from his screen. "Registered in Delaware 9 months ago. No listed partners, just a P.O. box in Wilmington. It's a shell corporation. A ghost." He looked up at Clara, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of belief in his tired eyes. It was a small thing, but it felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. A random person wouldn't invent the name of an obscure, specific shell corporation and know its exact, ominous translation from Japanese folklore. "This isn't proof," Ben said, his voice now a low, conspiratorial murmur. "But it's a thread, a damn interesting thread. If Croft was trying to offload the liability for the Oracle project, he had to offload it to something. If Okuri Inu LLC is that something, and we can connect it back to him." He sat back down, his coffee completely forgotten. He pulled a small, battered notepad and a pen from his jacket. "Okay, Clara," he said, and the simple act of him using her first name felt like a monumental victory. "Let's go over it all again, from the top." He clicked his pen. "And this time I'm taking notes." For the next 3 hours, the noisy diner melted away, becoming a sanctuary. It was just the two of them, a fired waitress with a dangerous memory and a jaded reporter who had just been given a reason to believe again. Clara provided the key, the name of a single, spectral company. Ben, with his years of navigating the shadowy corridors of corporate power, knew which locks that key might fit. He explained his theory. The Oracle project was Ethelred's crown jewel. The company's entire valuation, a staggering $50 billion, was predicated on its success. If there was a fundamental, catastrophic flaw in the technology, and Croft knew it, he would have a $500 million motive to pass off the liability to an investor before the truth came out and the whole edifice collapsed. Okuri Inu was the legal vessel created to contain that toxic secret. "This is bigger than just one bad contract," Ben said, a grim excitement animating his features. "If he knowingly concealed a flaw in a medical device while soliciting investment, that's massive securities fraud. It's criminal. If we can prove this, we don't just write a story. We end him." He looked at her, his expression turning deadly serious. "But I need you to understand. The moment we start pulling on this thread, Croft and Thorne will know. They won't just come after you with lawyers anymore. They will dig into every corner of your life. Your family, your friends, every mistake you've ever made. They will try to discredit you, to break you, to destroy you. Are you ready for that?" Clara thought of Marcus Thorne's cold eyes and his chillingly specific threat against her parents. They were already coming for her. Her only choice was whether to run or to fight back. "I'm ready," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Where do we start?" Ben Carter allowed himself a small, grim smile. "We start," he said, tapping the napkin with the kanji characters, "by finding out what the demon dog is hiding." The hunt was on. Ben's cluttered, paper-strewn cubicle at the Chronicle became their command center, a foxhole in a war of information. Ben, revitalized, worked his network of sources, diving deep into the labyrinth of corporate filings and financial arcana. Clara, in turn, became his secret weapon. Her eidetic memory of the contract's details and her intuitive understanding of the cultural nuances at play were assets Ben could never have found elsewhere. Their first target was Okuri Inu LLC. As Ben had predicted, the Delaware registration was a fortress of anonymity. "It's a black box inside a locked room in a house with no doors," he grumbled after days of hitting brick walls. But someone had to pay the filing fees. Someone had to sign the documents. There's always a paper trail, no matter how faint. He spent days calling in favors from contacts cultivated over 20 years. Bitter ex-regulators, gossipy paralegals, financial analysts with grudges. The trail led them to a bland corporate services firm in Wilmington that acted as a registered agent for thousands of such entities. It was a dead end, designed to be. Meanwhile, the pressure mounted. Clara felt a constant, prickling sense of being watched. A black sedan seemed to be parked across the street from her apartment building at all hours. Her phone calls would sometimes have a strange, faint echo. Marcus Thorne's threat was not idle. Frustration began to gnaw at them. What if Croft was simply too insulated, his tracks too perfectly covered? One evening, as Clara was poring over Ethelred's public SEC filings, dense, mind-numbing documents she was helping Ben cross-reference, she noticed something. A small, almost invisible footnote attached to the research and development budget. It detailed a one-time asset acquisition of $3.5 million paid to an entity called Finch Biodata. "Ben, look at this," she said, pointing to the line item. "Finch Biodata. Does that name ring a bell?" Ben's eyes narrowed. Finch, he mused. There was a scientist, a brilliant but a disgraced geneticist named Dr. Alistair Finch. He was on the verge of a major breakthrough in predictive diagnostics about 5 years ago. Then he just disappeared. Accusations of falsifying data, his university funding was pulled, his reputation was ruined. He fell off the map. Ben began typing furiously into his keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys. Finch Biodata, registered in the Cayman Islands, a classic offshore maneuver. He kept digging, cross-referencing dates. Registered 3 months before Ethelred announced those successful internal trials of the Oracle prototype. My God, Clara. Croft didn't invent the Oracle. He stole it, she whispered, the pieces clicking into place. Worse, Ben said, his face grim. He bought Finch's tarnished, potentially fraudulent research for pennies on the dollar, finished the work in secret, and passed it off as his own. The flaw in the Oracle isn't a bug. It's a fundamental feature of Finch's original discredited work. The whole thing is built on a foundation of sand. This was their first concrete link. The motive was no longer just about offloading liability. It was about concealing the fraudulent origin of his entire company. But they still needed proof of the flaw itself. They needed an inside source. Ben's investigation into Dr. Finch led him down a rabbit hole of academic forums and old conference proceedings. He finally found a name. Dr. Aris Thorne, a former colleague of Finch's, who had co-authored several early papers with him, before publicly distancing himself after the scandal broke. A quick search revealed that Dr. Thorne was now the head of the bioinformatics department at Columbia University. "This is delicate," Ben said. "This isn't some disgruntled engineer. This is a tenured academic. He'll be terrified of getting involved." Ben made the call. The initial conversation was tense, with Dr. Thorne flatly denying any knowledge. But Ben was persistent. He mentioned Okuri Inu. He mentioned the Tatsu Dynamics deal. He mentioned Clara's eyewitness account. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Meet me at the university library," Dr. Thorne said finally, his voice tight with anxiety. "The rare books room, in 1 hour. Come alone." Ben looked at Clara. "He said alone. He's spooked. But you're the one who saw the contract. You're the one who speaks the language of honor this guy might understand. We go together." The rare books room was a hushed, cathedral-like space that smelled of aging paper and leather. Dr. Aris Thorne was a small, bird-like man with frantic eyes behind thick glasses. He was visibly trembling. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he whispered, leading them to a secluded carrel. When Alistair's research was discredited, Croft swooped in. He didn't just buy the data. He bought Alistair's silence. He set him up in a private lab, funded him lavishly, but kept him a prisoner. Alistair refined the technology, but he could never fix the core flaw. "What is the flaw?" Clara asked, her voice gentle. Dr. Thorne took a shaky breath. "The algorithm has a signal-to-noise ratio problem. It's brilliant at detecting anomalies, but it can't reliably distinguish between a benign genetic marker and a malignant one. For every true positive it finds, it generates 9 false positives. It's not a diagnostic tool, it's a paranoia machine. It would tell millions of healthy people they were dying. And Croft knows this? Ben asked. He knows, Dr. Thorne confirmed. Alistair told him. He begged him not to take it to market. Last month, Alistair tried to leak the data to a regulator. 2 days later, he was dead. A boating accident in the Caribbean. Alistair didn't boat. A cold dread settled over Clara. This was no longer just about fraud. It was about murder. Before he died, Dr. Thorne continued, his eyes darting toward the door. Alistair managed to get a package to me. He knew Croft's people were watching him. It's a data chip. It contains all the raw, unadulterated trial data, the proof of the false positives, the emails between him and Croft. Everything. He slid a small, plain envelope across the table. Take this. Expose him. Do what Alistair couldn't. He stood up abruptly. You were never here. We never spoke. And with that, he scurried away, disappearing among the towering shelves of books. They had it. The smoking gun. The hard, undeniable proof Ben had been searching for. They rushed back to Ben's car, a beat-up sedan parked several blocks away. The elation was dizzying. As Ben unlocked the doors, 2 men stepped out from the shadows of a nearby building. They were large, impassive, and moved with an unnerving efficiency. One of them was the man Clara had seen in the black sedan outside her apartment. Mr. Carter. Miss Evans, the first man said, his voice flat and empty. Mr. Thorne would like a word, and he'd like the auto envelope. Ben shoved Clara into the passenger seat. Go! Go now! He yelled, turning to face them, trying to buy her a few seconds. Clara fumbled with the data chip, pulling it from the envelope and shoving it deep into the pocket of her jeans, just as one of the men grabbed Ben, slamming him against the car. The other man lunged for her, his hand reaching through the open door. Clara reacted on pure instinct, slamming the heavy car door on his arm. He roared in pain, stumbling back. In that split second, she scrambled over the center console into the driver's seat, jammed the keys into the ignition, and stomped on the gas. The engine screamed to life, and the car lurched forward, leaving Ben and the 2 thugs in a heap on the sidewalk. She sped away, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She glanced in the rearview mirror. A black sedan pulled away from the curb, its headlights cutting through the darkness as it began to pursue her. The hunt was no longer a metaphor. It was real. And it was happening now. The black sedan was a shark in the rearview mirror, relentless and closing fast. Clara's mind raced, a chaotic storm of terror and adrenaline. She was not a getaway driver. She was a waitress who took the subway. She swerved through the late-night Manhattan traffic, a symphony of blaring horns her only cover. The sedan mimicked her every move with terrifying precision. She had the data chip. That was all that mattered. But it was useless if she was caught. She needed to get it to Ben, and she needed to disappear. She made a split-second decision, wrenching the wheel and careening down a narrow one-way street the wrong way. The sedan hesitated for a moment, and that was all the opening she needed. She sped through an intersection, abandoned Ben's car in a bus lane near Penn Station, and plunged into the sprawling, anonymous chaos of the transit hub. She bought a ticket with cash to the first departing train, a local heading to suburban New Jersey. Huddled in her seat, she used a burner phone she and Ben had established for emergencies to send him a single encrypted text. Chip safe. I'm dark. Go. She knew Ben would understand. He had the story, the sources, the framework. The chip was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. He had to publish. Now, before Croft and Thorne could bury them both. The next 36 hours were a blur. Clara rode the train to its final stop, then took a bus to another town, paying for everything in cash, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. She was a ghost, haunted by the image of Ben being thrown against his car. Was he okay? Had they hurt him? The uncertainty was a physical pain. Finally, in a small public library in a quiet New Jersey town, she logged onto a computer. The front page of the New York Chronicle's website was a bombshell. The oracles lie. Ethelred CEO Julian Croft accused of multi-billion-dollar medical fraud, cover-up in scientist's death. The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Ben had woven together every thread: the fraudulent contract clause, the shell company Okuri Inu, the stolen research of Dr. Alastair Finch, the damning testimony of Dr. Aris Thorne, and the explosive, incontrovertible data from the chip. He had laid bare the entire conspiracy. The story was a nuclear detonation in the financial and tech worlds. Ethelred's stock was in freefall. Federal regulators were announcing emergency investigations. The story had gone live at 5:02 a.m. Ben, she realized, had worked through the night, even after being attacked, to get the truth out. A new text came through on her burner phone. It was from him. Safe. Bruised, but safe. They got the envelope, not the prize. It's done, but Croft is cornered. He's holding a press conference at Ethelred Tower, 10 a.m. Be there. Be there? The idea was insane. Croft's men were hunting her. A follow-up text arrived. Safest place is in public, in the middle of the storm you created. I have a press pass for you, and I have a guest coming who will want to see you. The plan was audacious, reckless, and terrifying. It was also the only way. Hiding would no longer work. Croft had proven he could find her anywhere. The only way out was to walk directly into the heart of the fire. She took a train back to the city, arriving just as the sun cast long shadows down the canyons of steel and glass. She met Ben near Ethelred Tower. He had a nasty bruise on his cheek and his jacket was torn, but his eyes were blazing with a triumphant fire. They roughed me up, took the empty envelope, and left me with a warning, he said. They thought they'd won. They had no idea the real prize was already gone. He handed her a press pass that identified her as a freelance photojournalist. They walked into the gleaming, cathedral-like lobby of Ethelred Tower. It was a maelstrom of activity, swarming with hundreds of reporters and camera crews from around the globe, all buzzing about Ben's story. In the chaos, no one gave a second glance to a rumpled reporter and a young woman in a plain, dark coat. They were invisible, hiding in plain sight. The press conference was being held in a vast, state-of-the-art auditorium. They found 2 seats in the back row. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She scanned the room and saw them. Marcus Thorne stood near the stage, his face a mask of cold fury. And guarding the exits were the 2 thugs who had attacked them. They were scanning the crowd, their eyes like weapons. Then, a quiet commotion drew her attention. A small, dignified delegation was being escorted to a reserved row of seats near the front. It was Mr. Kenji Ishikawa and his 2 associates. They had flown back from Tokyo, Ben's special guest. Mr. Ishikawa's face was impassive, but his presence was a powerful statement. He was there to bear witness. The lights dimmed. A hush fell, and Julian Croft walked onto the stage. He looked perfect. His suit was immaculate, his hair was perfectly styled, his famous smile was locked in place. But Clara, watching closely, could see the cracks, the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted the microphone, the faint sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He was an actor about to give the performance of his life, and he knew the entire world was watching. "Good morning," he began, his voice as smooth as polished marble. "I know there has been a great deal of speculation this morning, a work of fiction full of baseless claims from discredited sources published by a failing newspaper, but I am here to talk about facts, about the future." He launched into a brilliant, defiant speech, a masterwork of spin and misdirection. He never mentioned Ben's article by name, but referred to yellow journalism and enemies of progress. He spoke of his vision, of saving lives, of his unwavering commitment to integrity. He was trying to outrun the truth, to use his charisma as a shield. Reporters were shouting questions, but he ignored them, his voice rising. And to prove our confidence, I am thrilled to announce that we have just finalized a landmark partnership with the American Hospital Alliance to roll out the Oracle system nationwide, beginning next month. It was a stunning, desperate gambit. He was trying to create an unstoppable momentum. That's when Ben stood up. "Mr. Croft," he yelled, his voice cutting through the auditorium like a saw. "Ben Carter, New York Chronicle. Is it true that Dr. Alistair Finch, the true source of your technology, contacted regulators 2 days before his fatal boating accident?" The room exploded into a frenzy. Croft's smile tightened into a rictus. "We do not respond to insane conspiracy theories." "Then perhaps you'll respond to an eyewitness," Ben shouted back. He looked at Clara and gave a slight nod. "Now." Her legs felt like they were filled with concrete, but she forced herself to her feet. Every camera in the room swiveled to face her. The thugs at the exits tensed, but they were trapped, unable to make a move in front of 1,000 flashing cameras. Julian Croft stared at her. For one horrifying, beautiful second, his mask of composure shattered completely. His eyes widened with a mixture of pure disbelief and incandescent hatred. He could not believe she would dare to be here. "Mr. Croft," Clara said, her voice shaking but carrying across the silent room. The microphones on the news cameras picked it up, amplifying it for the world. "My name is Clara Evans. You tried to ruin my life. Your men attacked my friend." She let that statement hang in the air, a damning indictment. Then she turned her gaze to Mr. Ishikawa. She bowed her head deeply, a gesture of profound respect, and then she began to speak in fluent, powerful, and formal Japanese. "Ishikawa-sama, this man did not just lie to you about a contract. He built his entire company on a lie that would have harmed millions of people. He silenced the man who created his technology. He tried to buy my silence, and when I refused, he threatened my family." She held up the small, simple data chip, a tiny David against a corporate Goliath. "This is the proof, Dr. Finch's own data, the proof of the lie." A gasp rippled through the Japanese delegation. Mr. Ishikawa rose slowly to his feet, his gaze locking with Croft's. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. The flashbulbs erupted, capturing the silent, devastating judgment on his face. Julian Croft stood frozen on the stage, trapped in the glare of 100 spotlights. His smile was gone, his face was pale, his mouth hung slightly agape. He was a king, naked and exposed, watching his empire of lies crumble into dust around him, broadcast live to the entire world. The trap, so carefully laid for others, had finally sprung, and he was the one caught inside. The aftermath was not a single explosion, but a series of controlled demolitions that brought Julian Croft's empire down, piece by fraudulent piece. The press conference ended in pandemonium. As reporters surged the stage, quiet, grim-faced men and women in dark suits, bearing the insignias of the FBI and the SEC, entered the auditorium. They had clearly been waiting for the right moment. Julian Croft, the tech messiah, was escorted off the stage, his face a blank mask of shock. The world watched as he was placed in an unmarked car, the final, ignominious image of his reign. Marcus Thorne was intercepted near an exit, his icy composure finally shattering as he was read his rights. In the ensuing chaos, Clara and Ben slipped away. The cool morning air on the streets of Manhattan felt like the first breath after being held underwater for a long, long time. The adrenaline that had fueled Clara for days began to drain away, leaving in its place a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and the first fragile shoots of relief. It was over. The weeks that followed were a maelstrom. The collapse of Ethelred Corporation was total and spectacular. The Helios Papers, as the media dubbed the contents of the data chip, triggered a cascade of federal investigations and class action lawsuits from investors. Croft, facing a litany of charges including securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, was held without bail, deemed a flight risk. Clara became an unwilling and intensely private celebrity. She was the waitress who toppled a titan. Lucrative offers for interviews and book deals poured in. She refused them all. She gave her official, sealed testimony to the FBI, painstakingly walking them through every detail. Her precise memory and her fluency in Japanese made her the prosecution's unshakable star witness. A month after the press conference, a formal letter arrived from the Tanaka Corporation. It was a personal invitation from Mr. Kenji Ishikawa to meet for tea. She met him in a serene, sunlit suite at his hotel, overlooking Central Park. "Miss Evans," he said, greeting her with a deep bow. He spoke in Japanese. "Your grandfather taught you well, not just our language, but our concept of giri, of duty and honor. Your courage was a shield for my company. Your integrity was a sword that cut down a great evil." They spoke for over an hour. He asked about her grandfather, about her abandoned dreams. "A person of your character, with your unique skills, should be building bridges, not clearing tables," he said. He then made her an offer that went far beyond a simple job. Tatsu Dynamics was establishing a new charitable foundation dedicated to promoting ethical business practices and cross-cultural understanding. They wanted Clara to help run it. But first, he said, she needed to finish her education. The foundation would provide a full scholarship for her to complete her master's degree in international relations, with a guaranteed position waiting for her upon graduation. "Your role," he explained, "will be to ensure that the language of business is always the language of truth, to ensure we always know precisely what it says." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. It was not just a job. It was a restoration. It was the life she was meant to have, earned not by luck, but by an act of courage she thought she didn't possess. She accepted. Julian Croft's trial was short. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the testimony of dozens of former employees who came forward after the scandal broke, he pleaded guilty in exchange for a lesser sentence. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Ben Carter won the Pulitzer Prize for his investigation. His article became a landmark piece of journalism, a case study taught in universities. He and Clara remained close friends, bonded by the fire they had walked through together. Clara excelled in her studies. She helped her parents achieve the financial security they had lost years ago. Her work with the new foundation eventually took her around the world, from Tokyo to Geneva. She became known for her sharp intellect, her quiet grace, and an integrity that was as unyielding as steel. She was no longer an invisible woman in a world of powerful men. She was a guardian of the truth, a bridge between worlds, her grandfather's living legacy. Sometimes, late at night in a hotel room thousands of miles from home, she would think back to that moment in the gilded dining room, the weight of the silver water pitcher in her hand, her heart a frantic drum. She had been faced with a choice, silence and safety, or a single sentence and the abyss. By choosing to speak, She hadn't just exposed a criminal. She had reclaimed her own voice, her own future, and the honor of her family's name. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that it was the only choice she could have ever made.